Psalm 19 begins, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, night to night reveals knowledge. There's no speech, there are no words, whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world." This was certainly true recently, a couple of nights ago, and I hope that you had the opportunity. I know not everybody did. I know, and we almost didn't have the opportunity to see the Northern Lights. We were already in bed, and Sarah saw a text message or a post from somebody. You know, everybody's thing started going off, and she said, Steve Miller said, "Look at the western sky." So I knew that from where we are with all the street lights, we wouldn't be able to see anything from in town. I said, well, if we're going to see anything, we're going to have to get in the car. So we got dressed and drove out and kept going until we got away where we couldn't see any street lights. And then we saw an amazing show. Didn't get any good pictures. I borrowed this from a friend, Richard. But a lot of you I saw posted pictures, and you could see it from your houses as well. In addition to this purpley, reddish glow, there were also spots would appear that were green, and it would kind of grow in these big kind of glowing, look like kind of a glowing cloudish kind of thing. And then the most amazing thing, but I haven't seen any good pictures of this, but there were some little white sort of wisps that were moving, and it would just sort of dance on the sky, these long white, I don't know how to describe it, but just really amazing. And you know those things, this exists. I mean, we probably heard of the Northern Lights, but the very fact that we live in the South, you know, kind of rules out any hope that we would ever get to see that. And I know some people have gone like way far north hoping to see them. Karen said that they were hoping to see them in Alaska, and it didn't work out. Sam went to Iceland, which is supposed to be one of their best places to see it. But the time of year he went, it's daylight nearly all around the clock. So it didn't really work out for him either. And you know, you just think, well, that might be something I never get to see. And yet it came way down here where we live. That's really just sort of amazing. And Letty had a good Facebook post about it that quoted the beginning of this psalm. And she pointed out how, you know, excited we all were to share this and to tell everybody about it. And this reveals the glory of God. And then are we as excited to share that with people as we are to share, say, hey, look, you're going to miss it, go outside. Do we have that same kind of excitement to talk about God with others? So there's a lot of lessons and a lot of good points that people made, a lot of posts quoted, I'm sure, this psalm, and talked about the glory of God as we see in his creation. And so as we think about this particular psalm, it tells us that as we look into the heavens, they declare to us the glory of God. The sky, the King James says firmament there, but that's you see in the ESV it says the sky above. That's the sky proclaims his handiwork. It shows us this is God's doing, and this happens around the clock. So day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. The psalm goes on to describe the daytime marvel, which is of course the sun rising from its place, traveling across the sky from our perspective, and going to where it goes, and we see the glory of God in that. But also, as it mentions here in verse 2, at night we see and we learn from the sky. And I think verses 3 and 4 are basically saying that even though this isn't communicated to us in words like English, it's still a voice that is heard around the world, that people all around the planet see the same things, and they can see the same demonstration of God's glory. And we can also learn about God's glory, even though we don't speak the same language. We can all look up at the sky and be just amazed at what we see. And not only just, I mean, when you think about all the ways that the sky declares God's glory and reveals his handiwork, of course, you could see that in the methodical clockwork nature of the stars as they rotate and the planets as they move around. And you know, you get those, and then every now and then you have those amazing things like a lunar eclipse where the moon turns kind of reddish and then can be blocked by the sun. You also see it in the solar eclipse, which we were excited to experience this year. So you have some of those rare phenomenon. You see it and this is often mentioned in things like the lightning, in clouds and rain and storms. You see God's power in that. We talked about that, Debbie talked about that in class this morning. How we experienced that the night before this, right? The God's power in the sky. But I think we also see it in these rare events like this Aurora Borealis or the Northern Lights. All these things that we see that cause us to go out and just say, wow, that feeling that we're getting is intended to tell us something about God, about his glory, about his handiwork, that this is what he creates. And then, as many people have suggested, and as you read the various thoughts and posts, it causes you to just wonder about God's throne, God's presence, what it's like where God is, if this is what he created. And so what I want to do for today's lesson is look at 3 examples from the scriptures that describe someone getting a vision of the throne of God, where God dwells. There's only a handful of places in the Bible that give us a detailed description of this and what it sort of might look like. And I think we understand that these descriptions are worded in a way that we can understand and relate to. So they borrow things that from our existence. Like when you talk about in Revelation, we won't look at this passage, but like streets of gold. I think we understand that the image there is probably not literal streets made out of, the element gold, but it's just using something that we all recognize as precious and beautiful to paint this kind of marvelous picture of glory, really. And so as we read these, I wanted to look at the way that these images of God and his throne are described and notice some things that these different depictions have in common. So in Isaiah 6, beginning in verse 1, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up. The train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Now, this is one of those things that will come up in various accounts. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face. With 2 he covered his feet. With 2 he flew. One called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And it goes on from there, but there's often a cloud that represents the glory of God, especially as it entered and departed from the temple. And we see these, I don't know if they're not necessarily angelic, these heavenly beings called seraphim, and the way they're described, and there's holiness that's described, and we're told that the earth is full of the glory of God. We see it in his creation all around us, and of course, even in our own selves, we see the glory of God. Okay, let's go to another one in Ezekiel. Ezekiel chapter 1, a little bit longer of a reading here. Actually, the first whole chapter of Ezekiel describes a vision that he had. And this is the one, if you recall, where there's wheels within wheels and eyes in the wheels and all of that. I'm not going to go into all those verses. I'm going to focus mainly on the part where it describes what was above the wheels and the wheels, the image of God that he was able to see, the picture. So in verse 22, we had those living creatures again. Over the heads of the living creatures, there was the likeness of an expanse, so like something spread out, shining like awe-inspiring crystal, spread out above their heads. Under the expanse, their wings were stretched out straight toward one another. Each creature had 2 wings covering his body. Where they went, I heard the sound of their wings like the sound of many waters, like the sound of the Almighty, a sound of tumult like the sound of an army. When they stood still, they let down their wings. When there came a voice from above the expanse over their heads, and they stood still, and they let down their wings. So again, there's these winged creatures. There's noise here. There's sound. It sounds like, and notice the way he's trying to describe it. He said, like many waters. Have you ever been somewhere and you go hike into a waterfall? As you get closer and closer, you start to hear the roar way before you see it. You know you're getting close because there's just this roar. And when you stand there, it can be really, really loud, depending on how big the waterfall is. And so he's comparing it to these things like this noise, really awesome noise. Verse 26, above the expanse, so then above all of that, over their heads, there was the likeness of a throne. So the throne's on top of everything so far. In appearance like sapphire. Now we're going to notice that several of these use precious stones to describe the beauty of the picture that they saw. So this throne was like a sapphire, a beautiful blue. And seated above the likeness of the throne was a likeness with a human appearance. And upward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw, as it were, gleaming metal, like the appearance of fire enclosed all around. So get that picture for a moment. You've seen a blacksmith working, or you understand the idea. So it's like it heats up some metal, and when you pull it out of the fire, it's just glowing, and it's glowing a bright orange or bright red. And then he said it was sort of like above his waist, this part of him was like fire enclosed. So he's trying to describe what he saw, but it looked like this part of him was glowing in a flame color, right? That's the picture that he's describing of this someone who looked like a human seated on the throne. And this is the middle of verse 27. Downward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw, as it were, the appearance of fire, and there was a brightness around him, like the brightness of the bow that is in the cloud on the day of rain. So there was a rainbow. So was the appearance of brightness all around. Such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell on my face, and I heard the voice of one speaking. All right, so the details I want to draw out of this picture are, there's a lot going on beneath the throne, a lot, very detailed description of all these things happening. But as it kind of builds up and up and up, there was an expanse, and above that is a throne, and the one on the throne had this appearance of fire glowing in a bright red, like hot metal, like fire enclosed. He's glowing, and then around him is something like a rainbow. So that's an amazing picture that he was given in this vision that he had of seeing the throne room of God. Very colorful, very loud, very awe-inspiring, so that he just fell on his face in reaction to this. And now let's go to Revelation chapter 4 for the third one of these. Of course, the whole Revelation is filled with very colorful, loud scenes, scene after scene after scene of amazing things. So we could look at a lot of examples, but I really just want to focus on this one that describes the throne of the Lord in Revelation 4, beginning in verse 2. And once I was in the Spirit, behold, the throne stood in heaven, and one seated on the throne. And he who sat there had the appearance of jasper and carnelian. I'll come back to that. And around the throne there was a rainbow that had the appearance of an emerald. Around the throne were 24 thrones. Seated on the thrones were 24 elders clothed in white garments with golden crowns on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning, rumblings and peals of thunder. Before the throne were burning 7 torches of fire, which are the 7 spirits of God. Before the throne there was, as it were, a sea of glass like crystal. Just amazing. I want to point out this picture again of the one seated on the throne in verse 3. So do you remember that Ezekiel said he's trying to describe what he could see above the waist and below the waist? There was something glowing like hot metal, like a fire enclosed. Well, this is described as the appearance. There's 3 things that are used here. One is the appearance of jasper. So I didn't know what jasper looks like. I looked it up. Apparently, jasper comes in multiple colors. One of the most common colors is green and orange. Those are kind of the 2 most common types of jasper. But it's a stone made up of other things, like a conglomerate. And I'm not a geologist. I don't know much more than that. But I think if I understood right, each of these is a type of jasper. So you can find it in multicolored form, and you can find it as just green jasper, and you can find it as like a red jasper. There's different kinds of things that you might call jasper. In the ancient cultures, they really valued this stone when they would find it. And so you can find old things that were carved out of it and polished and made it to look really pretty because it's a very colorful stone. So there's some jasper there. The next thing is carnelian. Now, carnelian is a bright red. And The thing that's interesting to me about that is he had the appearance of carnelian. And, you know, if he was seeing the same thing that Ezekiel was seeing, you remember how Ezekiel described this? Ezekiel said it looked like glowing metal and it looked like fire enclosed. And when John sees this image, he says he looks like carnelian. And so I didn't know what carnelian, when you Google it, it's like, well, I can see how that would look like. Basically, if you're trying to describe what you can see with something you could relate it to, and you're saying, well, there's like, you know, like glowing metal or like carnelian, because it looks a lot like it looks like glowing metal in a way, you know, if you compare those two things. So I thought that was kind of neat. And then the next thing he says is there was a rainbow that had the appearance of an emerald. I think we know what emeralds look like, but they're all green. And you can find all kinds of pictures of emeralds. Some are polished. This is kind of a natural emerald stone that hasn't really been polished or, you know, but some emerald is almost clear, and but it always is green. Now, what's strange about that is that John says, remember that Ezekiel said there was a rainbow, something like a rainbow around the throne? And John says the same thing, but he adds that this rainbow had the appearance of an emerald. And I've often thought that was super interesting because we know what a rainbow looks like, right? We all had to color them as kids. We've all seen them outside. None of them look like an emerald. They look like red and yellow and pink and blue. You know, all those. They have like a lot of colors to them. And so when you think about emerald rainbows, always seem like an interesting thing that you know, it's like we don't see any emerald rainbows in nature, right? Well, then we got like, you know, I was just thinking about that. So remember where we started. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork, and day to day and night to night they pour out speech. So it is interesting as we just think about, because we're called to think about lightning and clouds and thunder, and all these things point to the glory of God, and something like an emerald rainbow. Now, here down in the South, I don't think we got a picture quite like this. And I don't know for sure if this is related to this emerald rainbow that John is talking about. It may have nothing to do with it. It's quite possible that it has nothing at all to do with it. But it's just interesting when you try to form in your mind a picture of an emerald rainbow. I don't know if there's a better thing to compare it to than the northern lights where you can clearly see the green, you know, light in the sky that bends around. Where Sarah's brother is in Michigan, they didn't take this picture. This is obviously further north. I found this one online, but Brian was able to see like the bright green and actually see the shape of it and all that. Here it was more like a fuzzy blob, the green parts, where there wasn't that clear, you know, wave that you can see in other elevations. But that's the pictures that you usually think of with the northern lights, is this big green arc waves in the sky. And so that you know, I'd never thought about that before. I'd always thought it's interesting to say an emerald rainbow, but something was around the throne that was green and was like a rainbow. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And the other thing that's interesting is the color of the Lord, or the one seated on the throne, was glowing in a red color. And the other color, and it doesn't really show up in this picture, although on the screen it's a little clearer than it is here. But the other color, as you know, and all the pictures seen, had a reddish, purplish glow. So when you read about Northern Lights, they say there's mainly two colors to the whole thing. It's green and red. It's the green, and then it depends on the part of the atmosphere where the radiation's coming as to how it excites it and what kind of color it gives off. But from here, you can see a purplish color, and you can see this green color. And I just think that's really awesome that in this picture of the throne, it's kind of that glowing red and a green emerald rainbow around it. Is there a connection? I don't know for sure, but I'd never thought about that before till thinking about these pictures of the throne of God and thinking about how that beautiful sight that was in the sky might tell us about the glory of God, which is what Psalm 19 says that it does. It teaches us about the glory of God. And then that brought to mind a couple of other things, just to toss out there for consideration. In several places in the Bible, the location of God's throne is described as being in the far north. I don't know if you ever noticed this. So, for example, I'll show you three such examples. In Psalm 48, great is the Lord, greatly to be praised in the city of our God. His holy mountain, beautiful in elevation, is the joy of all the earth. Mount Zion in the far north, the city of a great king. Within her citadels, God has made himself known as a fortress. If you read commentators talking about this, it's a little puzzling because if you're talking about literal Jerusalem, it was not in the far north. It wasn't even the far north of Israel. It's in the middle of Israel and even to the southern part of that. And so, but there was some concept of a Mount Zion, like the heavenly, perhaps, Mount Zion, and they imagine that being in the far north, or it's described as being far, far to the north. In the book of Job, when Elihu speaks up at the end, one of the things he says is, out of the north comes gold and splendor, and God is clothed with awesome majesty, which is interesting. A lot of times in the Bible, it talks about the rising and the setting of the sun, but there are some places that describe something being far, far, far to the north. And in Isaiah 14, this is this passage that's often referred to as talking about Lucifer, the dawn, the day star. It's actually a description of a king. And now I don't know if it's which one, it just left me. But you can go back and look and see. But it's calling out this king who got too big for his britches. And in that, he says, you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of the assembly in the far reaches of the north. So I don't know why the Holy Spirit chose, as he was revealing these things, to say that this assembly, the mountain of God, the assembly of where God dwells, is far, far, far to the north. But it did occur to me as I was just thinking about these lights and their color and their location, and if perhaps that from time to time there were solar storms, and even in the Bible lands, which is about the same latitude as we are, if they had this visible glowing thing in the sky, I could see why the Holy Spirit might use that as a description of the throne of God or his glory, just like lightning and anything else that you can observe is used to give us a sense of the power and the majesty and the glory of God. Perhaps these beautiful colors of glowing red and green rainbow also can be thought of as a way of saying, imagine the glory and the beauty that surrounds God where he dwells. So anyway, just something to think about. Now, let's make this a little more practical. What kind of lesson can we possibly get from this? Well, one, of course, we should just be in awe of God and in awe of his handiwork and his majesty and what he's able to do. But it should also make us want to long to be there. As we picture this, it's something very beautiful. It's something attractive. It's something like people would drive a long ways hoping to catch a glimpse of these lights in the sky. And we should just imagine, if that's even just a clue about what the glory that surrounds God, how much we should desire to see that for ourselves. And there's several verses that go along these lines. Psalm 84 says, how lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord of hosts. My soul longs, yes, faints for the courts of the Lord. My heart, my flesh sing for joy to the living God. Even the sparrow finds a home, the swallow a nest for herself, where she may lay her young at your altars, O Lord of hosts, my King and my God. Blessed are those who dwell in your house, ever singing your praise. So the psalmist just longs for and yearns to be in the presence of God. And we should have that feeling as well as we try to imagine the glory that surrounds him. Psalm 27 says, one thing I have asked of the Lord, and that I will seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. As we see these depictions and we imagine the glory that surrounds God, the beautiful colors, the sounds, we also should have this desire to gaze on that beauty and to dwell in his presence. In Romans, Paul makes a similar point, that he basically points out that there's a lot of stuff around us that's kind of crummy, that's bad, and it yearns to be made right. So not only the creation, which yearns and groans, we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly. as we wait eagerly for the adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. Talking about the resurrection, I believe. In this hope we were saved. Now, hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. There's a yearning, a groaning. And part of that is recognizing that we can imagine the glory and the beauty that surrounds God. But then when we look around us, we see a lot of suffering. We see decay. We see death. We see disease. We see age. We see things failing. And we see sin and rebellion and war. And that, the whole creation, this is what Paul says, in fact, the whole creation groans. Like everything is just moaning because of things are not the way they should be. Because of sin, because of the curses, because of corruption in the world, because of death, there is fear and there is decay, and it's sad. But we imagine and we groan and we look forward to a place where those things don't exist, in God's presence, where things are glorious and beautiful, and our bodies have been redeemed and rescued, and we've been transformed and been given eternal bodies that don't break down and age and decay. And so that, looking at what we see around us and then thinking about these pictures of God's throne should create in us this yearning and groaning and longing for home. So that's one thing. And then if that's true, if that creates that feeling in us, then it should also affect how we live our lives here and now. So a couple of verses that point this out, one from Paul, one from Peter. And Paul, writing to Titus, says, "The grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people, training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions, to live self-controlled, upright, godly lives in the present age, waiting for the blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, who gave himself up for us to redeem us from all lawlessness, to purify for himself a people for his own possession who are zealous for good works." So while, verse 13, we are waiting for the blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, while we're waiting for that, then we are training ourselves, and he trains us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions, to live self-controlled, upright. So if we have this hope and this yearning and this longing for heaven, it should affect how we live in the day-to-day here and now. And Peter says this as well when he's talking about the end, when the heavens will be destroyed. He says, since all these things are thus to be dissolved, the creation, even the sky, everything you see, what sort of people ought you to be in lives of holiness and godliness, waiting for, hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be set on fire and dissolved, the heavenly bodies will melt as they burn. But according to his promise, we are waiting for a new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. Therefore, beloved, since you are waiting for these, be diligent to be found by him without spot or blemish and at peace. So while we wait, that's where we're stuck now. We're waiting. We're here and we're waiting. And we're living, right? We're living, we're carrying on with our day-to-day lives, but we're doing so with an eye toward the goal, with our minds and our hearts set in heaven and imagining his throne. And as we've seen, we get things around us that tell us about the glory of God, that remind us of the glory of God. And I think the Northern Lights is just one of, infinite number of examples, but certainly something else that reminds us of the glory of God. So while we wait for that, knowing what's coming, we should be diligent to be found by him without spot or blemish. We should be living lives, as he says in verse 11, of holiness and godliness in the here and now. So we recognize that we fail to live up to that standard, and we do sin, and maybe we have rebelled against God. And there's another verse I want to bring into this about what God says about his dwelling place and his people. Notice he says in Isaiah 57, "Thus says the one who is high and lifted up, who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in the high and holy place, and also with him who is of a contrite and lowly spirit, to revive the spirit of the lowly, to revive the heart of the contrite." We don't use the word contrite, contrition very often in regular speech, but it talks about it means to be sorry. So if you are contrite, it means that you recognize you're in the wrong, and you mourn for that, and you grieve over your sin. You're sorry. And God sees when somebody is lowly, when they have humbled themselves, when they are sorry, then the one who is high and lifted up, who lives in eternity, whose name is holy, will come and dwell with him who is contrite and lowly, who will revive the spirit and revive the heart of the contrite. So it is for us then to recognize our place, and if we are not right with God, to humble ourselves and to be contrite in his presence. And even he who dwells in eternity will come and revive us. And I want to end with one last verse. As you think about, you might live your whole life and never see the northern stars. If you missed it the other night, I'm sorry. That might have been your shot. And I know that some people did. And we recalled all of our kids, and I think one or two was able to see it. Some were not able to. And that's okay. Maybe there'll be another chance. But you think about the glory of God's throne that we were reading about. Here's a fact. Everybody is going to see that one day. Because notice what is at the end of Revelation. It's, I saw the great white throne and him who is seated on it. From his presence, earth and sky fled away. There was no place found for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne. Books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged by what was written in the books according to what they had done. So he sees this scene, the sea gives up the dead that are in them, the graves give up the dead. All the dead come, and they appear before this throne room. They appear before the judgment seat, and then they are judged by what's written in the books. And if our names are in the Lamb's book of life, then our sins, that record is washed out and wiped out and erased, and we can stand before him pure and holy and without spot and without blame, not because that we live that way, but because of Jesus' sacrifice for us. And so that's what we want. We want to have our name in that list. When that book is open, we want to find your name written right there. And if we do, then when we stand before his throne, we will be welcomed into his presence. And we can only imagine the beauty and the glory that awaits us there. And so if somehow this morning your name is not written in the Lamb's book of life, if you've never given your life to him, or if you have and you've fallen away, then I would plead with you to humble yourself, to be contrite, to recognize God's glory and awesomeness and your state, and to make yourself right with God, to seek his forgiveness and mercy. And if you will, he will come to you and revive you. That's what he says. And if we can be of any assistance in that this morning,